Good evening, everyone. Thanks for making it out here on a rainy night. It's lovely to see you. My name is Uwcsea, I'm the head of college, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to tonight's Kishore Mahbubani Speaker Series session, where we invite our entire community, students, parents, board advisors, colleagues, and indeed anyone else who wants to join us, to hear and engage with the leading thinkers and intellects from around Singapore and wider. Our theme is Inform, Innovate, Inspire, and we really seek to understand how the ambitions of our mission for peace and sustainability, to really understand what they look like in practice for diplomats, for architects, for politicians, for people from all walks of life. And tonight, I'm delighted to welcome Professor Cheong Koon Hean. Prof is chair of the Kuan Centre for Innovative Cities, excuse me, got a frog in my throat, as well as the Professor of Practice at the Singapore University of Technology and Design. She is concurrently chairman of the Centre for Livable Cities under the Ministry of National Development. And if that wasn't enough, she is also the ambassador to Finland. Does she ever sleep? Prof, perhaps for us today, most engagingly, has played such an active role in the urban transformation that Singapore has undergone over the years. She was CEO of the Housing and Development Board from 2010 to 2020, overseeing the development and management of over 1 million public housing flats. At HDB, she introduced a whole new generation of public housing and large-scale sustainability initiatives such as biophilic and smart features in HDB towns. Prof was also the CEO of the URA, the Urban Redevelopment Authority, from 2004 to 2010, and steered the urban planning and development of Singapore, contributing her architectural and extensive experience in strategic land use, urban design, conservation of heritage, and indeed market conditions and forces. During her tenure, she uplifted planning and design standards and oversaw really significant areas of development, including Marina Bay area. And again, that wasn't enough to keep her busy, as she was at the time Deputy Secretary to the Ministry of National Development for 16 years from 2001 to 2016, overseeing urban redevelopment, public housing, and real estate. If I were to list Prof's other roles and rewards, it would take a significant part of the evening, so I will stop there and refer you to the web. Whatever you read there is true, surprisingly. But I will mention that she played a key role in conceptualizing the Lee Kuan Yew World City Prize and is its nominating committee chairman. And that essentially is the way Singapore gets the best ideas from all around the world, steals them, and puts them into practice here. She also serves on the Asia Sustainable Infrastructure Advisory Panel. You can, I think, see how lucky we are to have such a distinguished speaker tonight. And the format today will be a presentation from Professor Cheong, some discussion with our students, and then some question and answers. So, honoured guests, please join me in welcoming Professor Cheong to the stage.
Good evening. Thank you for coming. Can you hear me? Okay, this is not my usual loud voice because I'm recovering from a flu, but you should be able to hear me. Now, don't treat this as a formal lecture. Usually I tell stories, all right? That's my job. I like to tell stories. And first question is to you, rather than you posing it to me. How many of you are Singaporean? Okay, I see maybe 20%, 25%. Okay, great. The rest are our friends who've come from all over the world. So welcome to Singapore. And I hope you settle in well into Singapore. For some of you, maybe several years. For some of you, just for a little while. So actually today, what I'd like to talk to you is a little bit more about Singapore. And particularly to the Singaporeans. Because we live here and it's good to know a little bit about this tiny little place. So let me just get started. So I titled my talk as, I like to walk, so sorry, and I'm going to get out of the way so they can look at the slides and not look at me, about the urban lab, and it's about innovating for density and scarcity. What does that mean? I like to talk about cities. My background is that of an architect planner. I'm both an architect and an urban planner and an urban designer. but I deal a lot with government policies as well. So I spend the large part of my life really shaping cities, right? It's like playing Lego, you know. Sounds fun, right? Actually, it's a lot of hard work, okay? And if you look at cities today, they are not pretty. We have a lot of problems from pollution, traffic congestion, lack of affordable housing, big infrastructure problems that cannot curb and deal with rapid urbanization, climate change, food. Don't assume that tomorrow the supermarkets will be filled with food. And in Singapore particularly, we are dealing with a fast aging population. And of course, we just came through COVID with a lot of health scares. And who knows, the next pandemic may just be around the corner. So cities face actually a lot of problem. And you know, this issue of aging, I think Nick just said that I'm also the ambassador to Finland. So I speak a lot to the European countries. How many of you are from Europe? Yes. And my understanding that you also have an aging issue, right? So issues of tensions between immigration and all these issues all take place because you have nobody to fill the jobs that you want to fill. So we suffer the same sorts of issue. But so cities do have problems. And the future of cities is one of tireless innovation if we want to be able to deal with these problems. And cities, on the other hand, are also urban laboratories. All right, you deal with a big country is tough, but you deal with a city, I think the problems come together and you're able to find integrated solutions. But today I'm going to talk specifically about Singapore, mainly because Singapore represents all the issues that cities face, but multiplied probably 100-fold the problems. Why? Because we are very, very tiny. If you look at the map, we're the tip of Malaysia. Actually, I made that dot bigger than it is. Actually, the dot you can't even see on the map, you know, and we've been called the little red dot. And the word Singapore is always bigger on the map than the actual country, correct? Right. And how big are we, or how small are we? We are actually half the size of London. How many of you from London? Oh, great. Welcome to Singapore. I spent some time living in London. We're very tiny, but there is a big difference. In this tiny place of 720 square kilometers called Singapore, we have a 6 million population, which is very huge. And we are land and resource constrained. We are not London, we are not New York. We are a city-state. That means that we are a country. We are not just a city. I think we're one of the last remaining city-states in the world. Venice used to be, okay? There's a recent CNA program, please go back and watch it on MeWatch, about the balancing act that Singapore has to play. 2 episodes. So that's the homework for tonight, okay? Since I'm in the school, I can give homework, right? It's okay, all right, good. We're land and resource constrained. So unlike a city, we not only have to cater for the typical things, right? Schools, housing, recreation, parks, but we have to worry about water, energy, power, space for our military to train, the full range of infrastructure, air hub, the port, power plant generation, waste disposal. Everything that you have to deal with in a country, you have to deal with within this half the size of London, okay? And that is a big challenge. At the same time, therefore, this is why we became very high density, right? Because you just have to fit in so many people. So how do you mitigate density? How do you do magic and create that sense of space? And how do we become more livable? Maybe that's a test question. Tomorrow it'll be in the exam papers or something. Well, I'm first generation Singaporean. And when I grew up, and you won't believe it, in the 50s and 60s, Singapore is actually a nation of slums and squatters, very congested and polluted. If you only have lived in Singapore for a couple of years, you can't imagine. But that is Singapore. I remembered it when I was a little girl, which shows my age. I could smell Singapore River. It was so polluted. But over 60 years, we have transformed. And this is the Singapore you see today. And everybody always thinks Singapore is so rich, you can do all these things. No, you can't. We were very, very super poor. There were all slums and squatters all over the place. So how did that transformation take place? At least the physical transformation. There are a lot of urban innovations that we tried to introduce to help us to deal with our challenges. Today, I only have time to pick up two categories, right? One is called planning and development. The other is to talk about resource creation and optimization. So let me talk about planning and development. Well, I'm an urban planner. I'm a real believer in planning. Singapore has a very careful, structured process for planning. Why? When you have so little, you cannot afford to nilly-willy do whatever you want. If nothing is coordinated, you're going to waste land and you won't have enough for the future generation. Okay? If you have a nice cake and you throw a party and eat it up all at once over the party, there's nothing left for tomorrow. So we can't afford that. We have to plan very carefully. So the planning process becomes extremely, extremely important. We are strong believers of long-term planning. We look forward and we do plans that are long-term, and we do this exercise for the concept plan every 10 years or so. We take a 30, 40-year planning horizon, and then the plan is cascaded into a shorter horizon, 15 years, through the statutory master plan, where greater details are put in, and then there are many, many detailed plans that guide developments in Singapore. I'm not going to go through this process. In its own, it's probably another long lecture, and I think you'll be really bored. But take it from me, long-term planning is essential. Why? Because I have to ensure that I have enough land for future generations, for my children, for my grandchildren, that we can continue, that we will still be here after another 50 years, 100 years. In planning, it's important to get the structure right. So what is this important structure? Singapore has, I'm just picking out 3 strategies which has been very important in shaping what we are today. First is this idea of polycentricity. As we develop, we've always developed a strategy which is what we call polycentric and transit-oriented. This just means that you spread out your growth into many polycenters. They could be HDB town centers, they can be your regional centers, and this is where all the high-density living nodes are, and they're very well served by public transport. In fact, you've seen so much construction in Singapore that by 2030, 80% of the households will be within a 10-minute walk from a train station by 2030. This is almost as dense as London or New York, right? So please leave your car at home. You're going to move to Tengah, you know, so you have to take the train. We'll come to that. And it is very well served by public transport, but we also want to promote cycling and walking to become a car-light city. We cannot afford to keep building roads for more cars. So we develop ideas like a 20-minute town and a 45-minute city, and as it suggests, within the town, you can get anywhere within 20 minutes by walking, cycling, or 45 minutes from town to town and to the city, hopefully, right? That's the ambition. Paris has a 15-minute city ambition, right? I'm not sure if they've achieved it, but it's a good ambition. And so we want to create places that people can walk. How many of you have been to the rail corridor? Wow! Did the school bring them? No? I'm very impressed. And how many of you have been to the southern ridges? Wow, I'm super impressed, okay? So I'm very excited to be here talking to you. Now, the rail corridor and the southern ridges are walks that you can do, and we try very hard to make these walks happen. I worked on both of them, right? In southern ridges, it was actually comprised of a few little hill parks. Now, if you have a small park, it's a very small park. But the idea was that, what if I link up all the parks with these fantastic, iconic bridges? Then you have a very long distance to trek and to walk, right? All the way from Mount Faber to Cambridge to NUS. And it creates a beautiful walk where you can look at the city with the bridges and boardwalks. So again, these are innovations that you think of to stretch the imagination. How do I create space? Or at least the sense of space. It's like a magician, right? You want to create that. I'm an architect, right? Why do you not always plan your road straight? Sorry, there may be engineers who will tell me, yeah, why didn't you plan the road straight? What's the answer? Because you have to understand the human mind. If you can see everything at one go, it's not very interesting, right? But if you curve a road, you're always wondering what's behind it, and it leads you on that path. So it's also an understanding of perception of space by people. So anyway, we also have to socialize people to the idea of, can you please leave your car at home? So we have a lot of programs like car-free Sundays, car-free zones, and transforming streets for people. Can we bring the road back under the control of people and human activities rather than have it be taken over by the car? It took many years for us to still try and do that. And of course, we have congestion pricing since the 1970s. I think London, then we had it for more than 30 over years. London then introduced it. New York recently tried to introduce it. And I think there's a huge debate now with Trump whether it should go on or not. How many US citizens here? Good, you can tell us all about it. Interesting. But I do think New York should introduce congestion pricing. And so we are also trying to test bed autonomous mobility and to introduce EV cars. I don't think we've been very successful yet. We're still trying to put in all the charging points, but it will reduce pollution. Another big innovation, so I talked about the structure, right? And how you do decentralization and transit orientation to be well served by public transport. Urban greening is so essential for a very high density city. Singapore started as a garden city. In the 1960s, even though we were really, really poor, we didn't have food on the table, we were thinking of a garden city because it has an economic angle. We need this to be an attractive place to attract people to come and live here. And then we moved into the idea of being a city in a garden as we planted more, and now we're a city in nature because we want to bring back biodiversity and nature into the city. And how do we do that? We integrate a lot of this green and blue into the environment. What's green? Green means parks and trees and landscaping and nature areas, and the blue are all the water bodies. This is a very important plan. I just see blobs all over, but these blobs are linked. So we introduced this idea since the 1970s of a park connector. Remember the magic. On its own, a park is very tiny, but when you link them up, you can hike for 150 to 370 kilometers in Singapore. Singapore is only 49 kilometers, end to end, but you can hike 370 kilometers. Not bad, right? So it's this idea of creating that sense of space, and you link up all these parks. And today, we have already linked up quite a number. And we have also managed to safeguard whatever little we have of biodiversity by safeguarding nature parks. How many of you have been, I think most people put out all their hands, to MacRitchie or the water catchment areas, and now you have the zoo and you have the bird park that's moved there? Right. Many people don't realize that in the middle of Singapore is a primary forest. Now, I'm told by my national parks colleagues that in this primary forest, you have greater amount of biodiversity than North America. I can't believe it, but that's what he told me, all right? But it could also be because we're tropical. So tropical jungles tend to have a lot of biodiversity. And we try to save that, including what little marine terrestrial areas that we have. Tengah. Sorry, I want to go back. Now you see those little green lines I drew? Again, it's the idea of connecting these. If I am a wild animal at only one of these small little areas, we link them up with eco corridors so that you can move from area to area. So you expand the space for the biodiversity to get there, okay? So we come to Tengah. Maybe most of you will have graduated by then, but still, for the future, your school is going to move to Tengah. So Tengah is the latest new generation town for HDB. And when we planned this town, we saw that there's opportunity for Tengah to be a very important node to link the western catchment area to the central catchment area as a green node, even though it's going to be high density public housing. So if you look at the plans for, and also to link Kranji Reservoir down to Jurong Lake District. So if you look at the plan for Tengah, it has a forest corridor, and we introduce ideas like the garden farmways and the plantation farmways, because we also wanted to introduce urban farming into Tengah. So the way in which we plant in Tengah, particularly in these plantation farmways and garden farmways, is that we adopt what we call biophilic principles. So we use soil, flora and fauna, water to create spaces for people with great outdoor comfort and for health and well-being. And it enhances the quality of life. So when we plant, it's not just about just plant. There is a way to plant to bring back biodiversity. There's a way to plant to help us to be healthier. And there's a way to plant to retain water, to recycle the use of water. And these are some of the images that HDB has produced for some of the new projects that are coming up. And it will be a car-free town center. When we conceptualized the plan, we were hoping that we can make it a car-free town center. You can walk anywhere. All the buses and all the cars somehow go underground, hopefully disappear. And it will be a healthy town. So the idea is that it will be a town where it nudges you to move and to have greater mobility. See the picture here, you see a running track. Actually, this is a real project, probably under construction. It is a running track that is built on top of a multi-story car park. So you can actually run around, create new spaces skywards, which I will touch on a little later. So I think today more than 8,000 flats have already been built. Some of the neighborhood centers have come up already. So Tengah is shaping up and the school will move there eventually. Developing a city in nature is important. It's about weaving greenery into a very highly dense area. In fact, in this documentary that I encourage you to watch on CNA about the Balancing Act, somebody actually commented that in Singapore, you do not feel the claustrophobia that you do in many, many other densities. But that's because we try very hard to weave in the green. And we also bring back the biodiversity, okay? How many of you have seen otters in Singapore? Wow, this is a group that goes around Singapore a lot. But interestingly, when you do a city in nature, you know, just when you thought it's a really good idea, which I still think is a very good idea, and the otters all look so cute, right? Let me tell you, they're not so cute. They eat your fish, and now we're having a lot of problems with the otters, which we have to learn to get the human beings to coexist with the otters. So you do have new, fresh problems even when you introduce new ideas. Another thing we introduced, this idea of green and blue, is this. Singapore used to have a lot of these canals because, of course, the engineers say this is the most efficient way of taking away your flood water. But it took us a long time to persuade them that may not be the only solution. So we have actually naturalized a lot of the canals in Singapore. And when we naturalize it, they can become floodplains when it's combined with a park during a storm. So as a result, you see some of these features. Bishan is a very good example, the Bishan Ang Mo Kio Park. We took away the canal, and then it became a floodplain. And it's merged with a park. It's beautifully landscaped. You can go there, and it's very nice. And now it's a little river. But if you look at the river, when there's heavy rain, it overspills into the park. So actually, there's an alarm there. If you ever go there and this alarm goes off, please don't stay in that little river. Please get away, because it will soon look like this, okay? So these are what we call nature-based solution. How do you use nature to help you to mitigate floods? This is done a lot, particularly in, I think, Europe, the Netherlands, they do it a lot, and this is something we learn from. Now, the other idea is how do you create more space and more green space when you keep building? So we introduced this program called Landscaping for Urban Spaces and High Rises, called LUSH. I like the abbreviation. And the idea is that every time you build a new building and you remove the greenery, which is the same footprint as the building, right? You have to replace it somewhere. And where do you replace it? You can replace it in the sky, in the form of roof gardens or sky terraces. And as a result, you have buildings like this. These are real buildings. This is the Park Royal at Cross Street, and this is Capital Spring near Raffles Place. So architects have responded to these guidelines very well and are very creative in bringing back greenery. Have you been to this hotel? Okay, new place to go. Pan Pacific in Orchard Road. This architect particularly is particularly good at dealing with spaces like this to bring back greenery in the sky. So this is a type of sky terraces that he has introduced. So you actually create new recreation space in the sky, even as you take away the footprint of the building. When I worked on this, we introduced it when we were working on Marina Bay, when these guidelines came out, but now it's spread. And what is good is sometimes you don't even need to impose a condition because developers know that it brings value to the building. And of course, there's incentive. We don't count this space as the floor space. And not only private sector buildings, also in HDB. So this is HDB, Dawson. It's quite beautiful, right? And this is a project which we worked on in Punggol, and we've designed it such that there are terraces of gardens. How many of you have been to Punggol to cycle? Okay, less. Well, my suggestion is go here because it's really very nice. You can cycle along the Punggol waterway. And so, Singapore, although super high density, has been measured to have the highest density of greenery based on the comparison of tree canopy among 17 cities. This was a study done by MIT Sensible Lab with a Greenville index of 29.3%. So the idea is that yes, we're dense, but can we overcome that? Can we do better? What are the innovations possible? And so Marina Bay, you see the way we plan the urban design and the planning is like a checker box because we juxtapose the gardens and the low-rise areas with the high-density areas or with the water bodies. I think every building in Marina Bay will get a view to the water or to the greenery, all right? And we should try and introduce that in many of the HDB housing estates. And urban design is very important. What is urban design? Most of us know architecture, right? It's about the building. And most of us know about urban planning. It's the plan. But the plan is flat, right? Urban design sits in between the detail, architecture, and the plan, which is two-dimension. It marries the two and gives it a third dimension. So when we plan an area, Marina Bay was one of my favorite projects. We really shaped the city. So as you go to Marina Bay, you will see that the buildings are stepped back. Why? So that it doesn't overwhelm you, that high density when you are along the waterfront. And even the size of the Marina Bay, we studied many, many cities, including Baltimore. Anyone here from Baltimore? Wow, there's somebody here from Baltimore. Yes, so go to Baltimore, you know, the Bay Area that you have. I was there actually looking at it, you know, the scale. And to a certain extent, we more or less had similar scale. It cannot be too small because the high density will overwhelm the sense of scale, right? Always remember the human being is that scale, no matter how high your buildings are. So it's about being very human-centric in your planning. If it's too big, you lose the connection between this side and this side. And guess what? We all love to go there and watch the fireworks, right? But there's a certain connection with the people across the bay as well. So scale. So all of you who want to be architects and planners, maybe try and remember all these things I said, because that's what being an architect and planner is about, understanding this. But it's also about history, right? Doesn't mean we pull down everything. There's a long story of how we try to safeguard a lot of our heritage areas. I don't have time to go into, but we do. So the Urban Redevelopment Authority has conserved a lot of districts in whole, not singular buildings. There are more than 7,000 over buildings we've conserved, but we also conserve identity nodes, because identity nodes are the places you remember, your neighborhood. I don't know how many of you eat roti prata. For the Singaporean, roti prata, you will remember Jalan Kayu. That's where you go and eat your roti prata, So I think here you want to keep some of these neighborhoods that you remember as memory, and creating delightful spaces in the city. It can be under a viaduct, it can be a back lane, it can be a little space in the middle of the city, little pocket parks, and spaces where activity takes place. Placemaking is another very important function of the architect, the urban planner, and the urban designer. Making places that people want to go. They want to be there, right? So when we're planning Marina Bay, we spend a lot of effort in making public spaces that people will enjoy. And it should be for free. People can get access to the water, watch the fireworks, just go there for a picnic. And that's what makes the city come alive and have a soul, and make us feel we belong. People say not a livable city as well as a livable city. From the urban design point of view, I just want to point this out because a lot of you might have watched on TV or be present at the National Day celebrations. So Singapore, this is the old part of Singapore, which is the civic district where you have the Padang. The Padang is like a field, right? A village field in Malay, that's the word, Padang. And you have now it's the gallery, used to be the Supreme Court, and the museums. So this is the old Padang. When we plan Marina Bay, which is here, is the extension of the old city. And we made it such that it's a seamless extension to the new city. But we created something new apart from the new city. And what is that? It's the new water Padang. Because cities must have that identity and the sense of space. Why is it so important? So by creating these two public spaces, the old Padang and the new water Padang, imagine, where can you get something like this? Very few cities can achieve this. In a time of celebration, when it all comes together, it gives you that really amazing feel about this city that you are in. All right? This is a National Day celebration. I took out another slide, which is where there's F1. Well, those of you watch F1, maybe I should have left it in, but anyway. Okay? So what I'm saying is that all these things are planned for you to feel that sense of belonging and identify with the city and its activities and its programming and the people interaction. Now, the next part is a little bit more down to earth. It's about creating and optimizing resources. How do you create and optimize resource when you actually have nothing? Actually, Singapore has nothing. All we have are the people, right? And maybe some brains, to help us along. So land. Land is a big issue, right? So we've tried everything. We have reclaimed land. We have underground rock caverns. I have been down in this cavern before. It can host a Boeing jet. But now it's filled up. You can't go in already. It's filled with storage for some other liquids. The polder is something that we have done. It's almost finished, and we learned from the Netherlands to try and create land with less sand. And now we are experimenting with things like floating data centers. So it's all to create land. And we continue to do this, right? So for example, this is a map of Singapore, and you have a low-lying levels in the east coast of Singapore, right? And we are going to reclaim this area. Why? When we reclaim land, we not just create land, but we have multifunction use for the land that we reclaim. So we are going to take on this project on the whole of Eastern Coast, a very large reclamation project. But it does not only protect us from sea level rise. Of course, the land will be used for all sorts of users, housing, etc. But we will probably also build an inland reservoir to collect water. So multifunctionality is another innovative concept used in planning to optimize all your resources. I will cite a few other examples. For example, we co-locate things by tiering them because it creates new spaces, right? When you're up here, you don't even realize you're actually on the roof. This is Kampong Admiralty. This one, I bet you most of you have not been. Anyone? Okay. If you're living in Singapore, go and visit some of these HDB estates because to me, that's the real Singapore. It's not Marina Bay, yeah? Even though I was very involved in Marina Bay, but the real Singapore is in the heartlands. So in this project, it's very interesting. We experimented by tiering it with many, many facilities. A plaza, a civic plaza, a food court, a food center, a hawker center, retail, beverage, medical center, childcare. And and these two blocks are actually for the elderly. They're studio apartments. And what we did is we built in also childcare centers so that not only physically are they integrated, but program-wise, they're also integrated. We want the older people to interact with the young, and we want the young to get used to older people, right? I thought it's really lovely to actually do that. So again, it's ideas like this, you see. So this has become quite successful and we're replicating it, this project. Now, water. Water is existential to Singapore, and not just Singapore, many other places. So I want to say that we have 4 taps in Singapore, TAPS. One is we have to import water, which we have been doing from Malaysia, but no sovereign country can import water from another country forever, especially when Malaysia will have their own needs. So we also have to find other ways. So I'm going to run through the other 3 sources. One is domestic source. In Singapore, we capture every drop of water as much as possible that fall from the sky. We pray very hard it rains, but we try to capture everything. So there's a whole network of drains in Singapore to collect, and we are going to reach something like 90% of Singapore collects everything. Actually, water is something that many experts have said people will go to war for. And I'm not talking about Singapore, it's in other countries, right? And actually there is enough water in most places. The problem is they do not collect it efficiently. So to collect it efficiently, you need a whole system to make sure you collect and they don't just run off into the sea. And we have been doing that for decades. So we collect everything. But of course, when you collect all the water, we also have to find a place to store them. So in Singapore, there are many, many reservoirs. Every inland water body has been converted into a freshwater reservoir. So this is the one that you're familiar with. This is Marina Bay, right? I'm sure all of you have been to Marina Bay. When we plan Marina Bay, again, it's multifunctional use. I talked about Marina Bay, how nice, you have the fireworks and you have the boats that are on it. But it's more than that. It is a freshwater reservoir. We put in a barrage, and therefore Marina Bay has become Marina Reservoir. It is one of the largest inland water reservoirs in a city in the world. And we planned this from the beginning because we knew that it was important for us to use multifunctionality to optimize and conserve our resources. Now, new water. Okay, I'm going to ask you a question later on, but let me just explain. New water, what is new water? New water is actually recycled water. So what we have done is we collect everything for reuse. Sorry, you go out there and flush the toilet, we can be sure we've collected it later on, right? So we introduced this thing called the deep tunnel sewer system, which is really a massive superhighway for conveying used water by gravity. So everything is captured, industrial water, sewage, drainage water. It runs into this pipe that is 15 stories below ground. It's collected and it is pumped to, we don't pump actually, we use gravity for, because we use less energy, right? is then brought to the water reclamation plant that is also underground, and it is processed. And by doing that, we actually free up something like 1,000 hectares of land by removing the traditional pumping station. So we save land, and we collected all the water, and the water is recycled as new water. How many of you have drunk new water? Okay, next time I should see all the hands go up. Now, you may not want to drink new water, but I was in Baku for COP29, and in the Singapore Pavilion, we serve a drink. And this drink is called New Brew, because we converted new water. We had a microbrewery that made beer out of it, and I was told it's very good. Okay? So if you see in the supermarket, try a can. Sorry, not sure about the kids, but the parents. So it's again a mindset shift. Actually, the water is very clean. It is so clean that actually most of us don't actually drink it. It's pumped back to industry that needs super clean water, like distilled water, like wafer-fed plants. All right? Actually, very little of it is drunk. But we still put some of it into reservoir to socialize people to the idea that you can actually drink it if you need to drink it. Okay? Right. And I must tell you that in times of drought, it is very important to have this source of water. And of course, desalination, which many of you know what it is. Through reverse osmosis, we can actually remove the salt from the seawater. And of course, we're an island, there's plenty of seawater. There's only one other problem, which I will come to. But in the design of the infrastructure, again, remember multifunctionality. This is a plant at the East Coast Parkway that is a desalination plant. How many of you have been there? Okay, not bad, quite a lot of you. Take a walk there, and you can actually jog on top. So we just hide it, and then we just merge it with the park. It's actually quite a nice place to go to for a walk. All the pumps are underground. And, but then comes another problem. Now that we have learned how to process water, we face a new challenge, which is what? Energy. It's become our new water problem. You need energy to process the water. So we now have to face new challenges of how to reduce the use of energy when we try to process our water. So just one idea, in the new Tuas Nexus, we have co-located the Tuas reclamation plant with the integrated waste management facility to strengthen what we call the waste energy water nexus. So for example, when we incinerate all our waste, by the way, in Singapore, because we have no place, no landfill to put the waste. But when we incinerate the waste, it generates heat. The heat goes to processing the recycled water. When the recycled water is processed, it leaves behind sludge. And this sludge can be incinerated and then generates heat. And so the cycle goes on and on and on. So the idea really is to have a very cyclical approach to your resource use so that one feeds into another. I'm just giving you one example. Actually, there are many, many examples that we are trying out, all right? But that's one way of trying to conserve energy. And of course, again, multifunctionality, right? We float solar farms on our reservoirs. I think we have one of the largest solar farms of water in the world. And this is our only landfill, and we also intend to put solar panels on it. Water, we have to reimagine food. We buy almost everything, and you can see the problems when you have COVID and all the supply chains are affected. So you need to find ways to diversify your food sources. But we do want to try to at least meet 30% of our nutrition needs. And we are looking at things like urban farming and farming on the roofs. So if you go to some of the HDB rooftops of car parks, we have started some commercial farming on the roof. And of course, technology is very important. We use a lot of technology to help us in our planning, to inform our planning decisions with deeper insights during data analytics, collecting data. I won't go into this because it's a huge topic on its own. But our planning is very driven by data and computer modeling. So we don't just draw because we think it looks nice, but there's a lot of science behind it. We do a lot. Every new town has sunshade analysis. We look at solar irradiance, so we know where are the shady areas, where are the best areas to put solar panels to optimize solar PV. We look at wind flow analysis, where we do a lot of urban design. We juxtapose the areas, move the blocks around so that we have good wind flow through the town. And noise modeling to reduce noise, which is becoming a big problem in high-density cities. So I'm going to stop there. I think I probably exceeded my time already into Q&A. But so basically, I think planning for a city-state is not easy. But I also think that for 60 years, we have tried our best. And we will continue to do so to make this place a very livable place for everyone who's here. Thank you very much. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Professor. I already know I have so much to think about just in terms of how Singapore approaches its urban planning. But before we get into our questions, we'll just quickly introduce ourselves. My name is Tane. I'm a grade 11 student at East.
Hi, I'm Laura, and I'm a grade 11 student in East as well.
I'm Ashan. I'm a grade 12 student here at Dover.
Hi everyone, my name is Jessie and I'm also a grade 11 student in Dover.
The first question I had on my mind, and I do think other people might have been wondering, you've had a remarkably distinguished career in the Singapore government, and your work as a planner and architect would have allowed you to work in so many other spaces and industries. What drew you to the public service for so long in Singapore?
What kept me in public service? Actually, the profession that I'm in needs a lot of staying power. Because as an architect, I say this all the time, and if you're an architect, you probably could build a building in 3 years. But if you want to shape a city, it takes you 30 years. So if you want to be an urban planner, being in public service makes more sense because only the public service has that administrative structure and regulatory environment to make your plans happen. Because otherwise, you are just going to, as an architect, I can only build singular buildings, right? But I cannot plan an entire area. But I can as an urban planner, and only the government can do that. So I think partly that is the motivation for remaining in public service to get the job done, right? You want to see it happen, and you need to have that perseverance and staying power. Now, can I suggest that you put some lights on for the audience? I'm just looking at black space, and I like to see you. Thank you. I think that's better. Thank you. Right.
In my work with Tampines Minds, supporting yoga therapy sessions for individuals with different abilities, I've seen firsthand how thoughtful design can create spaces that encourage connection and accessibility. A truly livable city isn't just about efficiency and sustainability, as you said. It's about creating spaces and environments where people truly feel they belong and where community and belonging and inclusivity are at the forefront and core of the design. In Singapore, where urban planning is often seen through the lens of innovation, how do you balance large-scale initiatives with these more personal and human elements of city life?
Yeah, well, I'm very glad you're volunteering. And it's a very good question. Yeah, you have to navigate both at the macro level and also at the micro level, right? And then you're trying to meet. So this question is a lot about how do you engage people in the planning. I've always had questions asked that, oh, Singapore is very top-down planning, right? Maybe 30 years ago, it tended to be a little bit more top-down because at that time, the infrastructure needs to be in place. But in public engagement, there are things that, certain decisions that you can consult, but at the end of the day, you do need to make a decision. So for example, where do you put the airport, right? Power plants or Okay, where you run the MRT can be open to a lot of conversations, like the central line that passed through the water catchment area. Those you have to have a lot of debate. But there are certain major things that you can consult, but in the end you have to decide, because it's the main skeleton of the city. But aside from that, there is a lot of consultation, and you can see in recent years that there is a lot of consultation. In fact, I say we consult to death, you know. At some point, you come from many of the Western cities where public consultation is very big. But as a practicing urban planner, I can say that you need to strike a balance, because if you keep consulting, you get paralysis. No decisions get made, right? You want an MRT line, it takes you 30 years. So where does the consultation, at some point you have to end and you have to decide, right? And when you consult, there are many views. I consult a lot with, say, the Nature Society, right? So we will meet with some people from Nature Society who say they represent the Nature Society. But then after we've agreed and we do something, everybody else objects. So within the interest group, you also have different views. So I think to a certain extent, when you want the ground-up views, you must expect a variety of views, and we should allow that to take place. But after as much conversation as possible, at some point you will need to make some decisions. We do a lot of consultation. They can be through focus groups. It can be through people who are online, people can write to you. We used to have groups like this, and we present a plan and everybody gives feedback. And now we don't even formulate the plan yet. It used to be the days where we formulate the plan, then we say, what do you think? Now we don't even do that. Now we say, what matters to you? So you see the conversation shifts, right? The starting point is, what matters to you? And what do you want to see? And in the place that you live, right? What are the things that gives you the memories? What is important to you? So you see the conversation has completely shifted. But in doing so, it takes a lot of time, okay? So planners now have to factor in the time for that type of a consultation. But I think it's necessary, because as you become more dense and people are almost jostling, right? You do need to hear them out. And actually the process is important, because they hear each other out. It's not about them and the government, it's about them with each other. So we're actually very happy to put people with differing views together, because then they are actually finding the solution when they talk to each other, because they don't agree, right? And in the end, the solution is probably pretty close to what we could come up with when you have differing views. So it's also a time for people to have conversation with each other. I think that's important, right?
So you talked about earlier in your presentation about the need for policymakers to find balance. And one sort of balancing act I'm kind of aware of when it comes to development in Singapore is the need for public housing to be a nest egg for Singaporeans, so like a stable foundation for their retirement plans, but also the need for public housing to be plentiful. So I can imagine that one of your biggest challenges would have been trying to find that balance between building enough housing, but also making sure that that housing is valuable enough for Singaporeans to sort of execute a good retirement plan. So I'm just wondering, how did you try to find that balance in your time within the Ministry of Financial Development as CEO of HDB? If you're involved in that, and what kind of factors would have gone into deciding that balance?
Well, I think the government has promised that they will always provide affordable housing, and I think you try to do that. But the problem is that today, to most people, public housing is they don't see just a roof over their head, right? I think it's fine if there is a certain degree of growth in value, because that's one way of transferring wealth to people. But I think the moment that growth in value becomes astronomical, it's a problem. Why? Most of you don't own public housing here, so let me try and explain to you. Assuming you buy public housing from the HDB, it's highly subsidized, right? And after 5 years, you are for whatever reason, you decide you want to sell it. Now, when you sell it, we allow you to sell it in the resale market. We don't say sell it back to the HDB, right? Because whatever you sell in the resale market, there will be a resale market value, which is usually higher than what you bought from the HDB, right? That amount of money you keep. The government does not take that money back because it's a form of, I suppose, wealth transfer. It helps you to have mobility. But what if the resale market is very high? Who buys from the resale market? Whoever buys from the resale market has to pay a lot of money for it. It could be your children, you know. I'm assuming if you're Singaporean, all right? You're not, so this doesn't affect you. But you can just see the problem, right? So whenever Singaporeans tell me, oh, it's $1 million resale flat, a HDB flat, I say, no, it's not. It is $1 million resale flat that you put out to the market. It is not what the government put out to the market. Then my question to the Singaporean is, if you want to reduce the price of the resale flat in the market for your children, would you sell it at the same price that you bought from HDB? No. So you see, you are sort of caught in that situation, right? And so I think it cannot be seen as a way to make a lot of money. I think it's great. It's a roof over your head, plus the ability to have some growth. I think it's good. But if it goes into an attitude that it's there just to make money, somebody has to pay for it, and it will be the next generation. Now, for these reasons, the government has recently introduced new forms of flats where they call it prime flats, and there is a tiering of where they are in very good locations, and these flats, there are new conditions, right? And the new condition is to discourage people from flipping the unit. And because in these locations, for HDB to sell it to you, they have to put in a lot of subsidy in order to enable you to afford them in these prime locations, right? Greater Southern Waterfront, for example. And those subsidies will have to be clawed back when you sell it subsequently. Right up to date, we never claw back, right? Because this is taxpayers' money. So there'll be some upside, but I think some of it will be clawed back to repay some of the higher subsidies that are given by the government. And there are conditions to live there for 10 years, and you cannot rent it out, etc. Because these then dampen that trajectory of the price going very, very high. Because what's the point? The first person who buys it makes a lot of money, but is the next generation going to be able to afford it? No, right? So housing policies are actually very, very complex. I'm just simplifying it, but actually it's very complicated. But this gives you a sense of the difficulties you have in balancing, right? You want to subsidize and make it affordable. First owner, great, but next owner, very expensive for them, for the people who buy over, right? So how do we balance and dampen that demand?
Thank you for your answer. So as a Peruvian that is studying in Singapore, I have been able to observe different approaches to urban development. And many of those are thanks to you, which I am very grateful for that. And as you mentioned before, you like to get ideas from these external cities development too. So I also like that, and I would like to underline about which kind of key lessons could cities like in Peru, Lima, that approaches many challenges regarding to urban development, approach like a first step to can be near to a more sustainable city development, and most of all could facilitate things for people and community.
You're from Peru?
Yes, I'm from Peru.
Great, all right. I've only transited in Peru. I've never actually stepped out and looked at the city. But actually, South American cities face many, many challenges. And yet we're learning a lot from South American cities. I chaired the Lee Kuan Yew World City Prize nominating committee, so I have the privilege of looking at many cities who submit their city to win this prize. And you find that cities, every city can teach us many, many lessons. There are different levels of development, but each one holds very good lessons for other cities who are going through the same struggles. For the South American cities, I haven't been to Peru, but one of the winners of the Lee Kuan Yew World City Prize is Medellin. And Medellin is, how do you pronounce it, Medellin? Well, they call it Medellin, right? So I'm just following the Colombians. Used to be called the homicide capital of the world. How many from Colombia? Nobody, okay. We used to watch movies, right? And you look at Colombia. And so it was a homicide capital of the world, and high crime rates, a lot of homicides. People were very poor. I've been there, and a lot of them were living in the hillside. So when we assessed the city, we actually gave them the prize because of the great innovation they have in making the best of what they have, right? So for example, because the city expanded, a lot of the squatter areas were in the hillsides, up the hill. And a lot of jobs were in the city. So these people have trouble getting into the city to do the job. So they came up with this clever idea to put in transportation. If you tell them to put in a Singapore MRT line, forget it. It's too expensive a solution, right? It doesn't work for them. So they put in cable cars. They use cable cars to bring people down very cheaply, right? So found a cheap solution. Then they found all these old escalators, you know, and then they built all these escalators up the hill, right, to help people to improve the connectivity between the hillside and the city. And they built a lot of equivalent to community centers and libraries in these areas. And I think in South America, many of these areas are the favelas, right? And people could access to libraries, to books, community facilities, recreation. It was very impressive. And so the mayor, in fact, over successive mayors, they kept building on this, and they are trying to turn around the economy into a knowledge economy. So we were actually very, very impressed. The other place is, sorry, I've just slipped my mind, but in South America, the bus transit is also another very good example that many cities learn from. You don't always have to have the most expensive solutions, but the bus transit works for many of the South American cities. So, by the way, last year, we actually gave the prize to New Mexico. And because they were so innovative in dealing with to put in government policies that really help the low income. So I'm just saying that every city has a lesson that we can learn from.
We're now going to open the floor to audience questions. So if you have a question, you can just raise your hand. We'll be over there with a mic.
I think the gentleman put up first, because I saw his hand go up, so I thought I would just highlight it. Oh, okay, all right. Is it on?
Hi. For the HDB, I have a question. When you say that someone buys an HDB from the government, they can resell it in the market. Does the government take back the HDBs if they want to sell it back?
No.
No.
We do not take the profits you make. Is that the question?
No. For example, I bought an HDB from the government, and if I want to sell it back to the government, is that possible?
Why would you want to sell it back to the government? You would sell it, usually, I would say as far as everybody sells it in the resale market because they get a better price for it. There are certain occasions where the government buys it back, very, very rare, very, very odd situations where maybe, I don't know, they can't find a buyer and they just want to sell it back.
All right.
All right? But it's rare. Most times you would sell it in the resale market. Yeah.
Hello.
Oh,
Thank you, Prof. Cheong, for your sharing. We heard such an excellent urban planning ideas and its evolution. How much are we exporting these ideas to other countries? And are there many countries are receptive of what we have been doing? And how successful and what are the challenges doing this?
Thank you. I think first we recognize we're a very tiny place, and I think we must have sufficient humility to to think that I don't think that we're here to teach anybody anything, right? But people do come and look at our experience, and if it is relevant and they can try it out, great. And we have also, if they ask for help, sometimes we do. I give you one example. We are very small. We're not here to tell anybody what to do, but we do two things, all right? One is we like to convene cities from all over the world in Singapore, for different cities, including South American cities, to share their experience. We share our experience, and it is really for cities to mutually benefit by listening to each other. And I can tell you, every city is different, culture different, economy is different, the structure of the economy, the infrastructure you have is all different. So you cannot take wholesale, right? But like me, I go to Baltimore to learn about the scale of the water body. I go to Australia, I travel all over the place to learn from people. They like to come and see, and they take back what they think might be relevant. Then that's great, right? I don't think we are here to force them to accept any of the ideas, and you can't, because we are all very, very different contexts. For city planning, the context is very, very important, right? But I do have an example whereby when China first opened up, they were very interested in our city planning model. And we have actually trained hundreds of Chinese city mayors. But I would say that now in China, you go to any city, the planning is very good. That's why they have, and because they start from a different point, right? They are able to leapfrog everybody, learn the best, and then they introduced it. So you find that a lot of the Chinese cities are well planned. The use of smart technology is quite amazing. And in fact, now we have to go back and learn, say, from them, you know, because, for example, their robotics is very good. So I think cities are constantly learning from each other. And we pick the best, lah. We pick the best for something that is relevant for ourselves. But we want to encourage that conversation. That's why the Lee Kuan Yew World City Prize, when we introduced it, was really to start a conversation among cities. What are the cities that inspire us that we can learn from? And that's what we hope to do, because cities face so many problems. Yeah. Okay.
Hi, thank you so much for your talk. I'm Alpha, I'm an alum. I have two specific questions regarding city planning. The first question is, why are there so few bike lanes in Singapore? As a cyclist,
so few what, sorry?
Bike lanes.
Bike lanes, yes.
As a cyclist, I either have to cycle
Yeah.
with the cars or
Yeah.
cycle with the pedestrians.
Yeah.
Either case is quite dangerous. So what's the decision making behind that? The second question is, why is still Singapore reclaiming land when there are large swaths of land unused? When we look at the region south of Marina Bay, when we look at just the region between our school and One North MRT, there's large swaths of green land that's not used. What's the plans for those swaths of land? And also, like, there's a giant golf course in Marina East. And is it really a very efficient way of using land that has been reclaimed from the ocean? Thank you.
Okay, very good questions. You must go and do an urban planning course. I encourage you. He asked very good questions. Okay, what was the first question? The first question was on? Bike lanes. I fully agree with you. We started talking about bike lanes actually quite a long time ago. And the network is slowly being built, but it takes time. There are certain towns that have done well, like Tampines is one where you can pretty much cycle very well. The other one is Punggol, because when we first design and plan, we put in the bike lanes. But when you try to do bike lanes retrospectively, it's very, very tough. It's really not easy. So Ang Mo Kio town has tried to put it in, and they can only do it little bits at a time. I agree with you. I think it's good to speed it up, but there are a lot of technical issues, especially in older areas, because there's just no space. There's just no space for the bike lanes, right? And so in many cities, they cycle with the cars, right? I mean, when I'm in Copenhagen, in fact, I'm scared of the bikes because the bikes outnumber the cars, you know. It's really frightening when they just take off, right? Because they're so good at cycling. So yes, I agree with you. We could do more, but it takes time. So I give you an example. You know, I gave you that example of the park connectors, right? And now we have, I think must be 200 over kilometers worth. Do you know how long it took? I remember doing the plan in 1971 when this idea was first put in, and it just took so long, right? But now that it's happening, people appreciate it and say, oh good, it's there. But that's why I say it takes 30 years to shape a city. It just takes very long because it's not so simple. When you see a bike lane being done in an old part of the city, they have to figure out everything, you know, because there's just no space. And what do? Do I eat into your land? Chad, move your fence back? Are you going to be happy? Do I acquire your land to do the bike lane? And then I have to redo all the bus stops along the way? It is actually more complicated than we think. That's one question. Now, the other thing is, why do you reclaim when there is so much land? First, let me say there is not a lot of land. Everything that you see that's empty, if you just go into the URA website and look at the master plan, there is already a use earmark. You do not use up all your land overnight. First principle, right? So if you don't use up all your land overnight, you put in, to optimize the land, you put in interim use that don't need to be there forever. The golf course is one of them, all right? And in fact, that golf course is moving or has moved already. It's been taken down, all right? So many of the golf courses are actually interim uses. They are not permanent. Now, the third answer is, why do you reclaim land? Because I'm a very good planner. I look down the road and worry about where can I get more land, all right? But we will not reclaim forever because there's a territorial boundary we cannot exceed anyway. And remember, Singapore is also one of the biggest ports in the world. I need to keep the sea for the ships. So again, find balancing act, go and watch CNA. So you also have to deal with that, right? So let me give you a very good example of why it is so important to plan ahead and do the land reclamation. Marina Bay sits on reclaimed land, okay? That land has been reclaimed since the 1970s because my predecessors have the foresight as a good planners to anticipate that the city has to grow. So they reclaimed the land in the 70s, and I only started moving in 2003, many years later, 20, 30 years later. And when they reclaim the land, what does it mean? Many cities face the urban pressure, all right? And when they face urban pressures, what do? They pull down the old buildings, and we lose our heritage. But my predecessors had the foresight to plan for city growth. And as a result, we were able to save Little India, Chinatown, Kampong Glam, many of the heritage areas of Singapore in entire districts. For a very land-scarce city-state, it's amazing that you can actually keep your heritage areas in entirety, just like you have the French Quarter in many, many cities all over the world, right? They would keep certain quarters. Now, that was only possible because we knew we had reclaimed Marina Bay and we can move in. Now you look at Marina Bay and you say, yeah, there's plenty of land. Not if you're planning for 50 to 100 years. We will have to grow and use up that land. But in the meantime, we do make use of that land, right? For other reasons. We have the circus come to town, we put it there. And you know, some of this land will be used for under interim users. And interim could be as long as 30 years until you need it in the future. So your question is a very good one because it demonstrates exactly why long-term planning is so important for a city-state like Singapore, right? I get pressured all the time to release land to do all sorts of things, but then once you do it, you have no more land. Who would you like to pass the microphone?
Hello, my name is Patrick, and I'm one of the leaders of the Architecture Society here at Dover. My question for you today is, you've mentioned that urban planning operates at multiple levels, from individual buildings to citywide infrastructure and regional development. And so how do you approach decision-making at different levels to ensure cohesion and balance between micro-level architectural design and macro-level urban strategies and development?
Well, that's a big question. I'll just try and cut it short because there are lots of questions. Yeah, so the planning process is very important, and we have quite a well-developed process. At the long-term safeguarding of land level, you have the concept plan, right? So the concept plan looks very far in the future, and pretty conceptually, you sort of know which is the land is for what. But then we look at a 15-year time frame. We start to look at a statutory master plan that we review every 5 years. Now that starts to be more real. We give more details on exactly what the piece of land can be used for, how high you can build, what is the intensity that you can build with. Why do we do that? Some people say you're so structured, you're so fixed, but not really. The businesses love it because it's transparent. When plans are not transparent, it leads to a lot of problems. When plans are transparent, it helps the businessman to know exactly the type of decisions that he can make. In many cities, plans are not transparent, and it can lead to many problems, including corruption, right? When things are very transparent, everybody knows everything, there's less room for problems like corruption, for example. But we did it not so much because of the corruption problem, but because it helps business people to make decisions, right? Whether you want to invest in a property, etc. Now, at the detail level at architecture, actually we encourage creativity. We have design competitions sometimes. We encourage that for really great designs. You are going to have something like that for your new campus. We do have many detailed plans to guide architects, but they're not set in stone, but it gives people an idea of how they relate to each other, to their neighbors. That's where urban design comes in. Architects like to think that we are the center of the universe, but we're not. I just said this to a whole group of architects and become very unpopular, I think. But it's true, because having done planning, you realize that you have to be a good neighbor, because when you're in a dense place, when you build your own building, you have a neighbor, front, left, center, right? And how do you relate? How do you integrate in a manner that is good for the city? You contribute back to the city. So we also have panels where we discuss a lot with architects on their design. For very strategic projects, you even have architecture design panels. This is done in many great cities like Melbourne. We learn a lot from Melbourne, all right? And at consultative level, at the very micro, like particularly in HDB, we do so much consultation to find out what people want, okay? Even what to name their estate sometimes, you know? So it takes place at many, many levels. Yeah, that's a short answer. Thank you. But it's a good question. I think somebody put up. Okay, right. Hi.
Hi, I'm Carla, and I'm in grade 8. And my question was, how do you think AI would affect Singapore's urban growth in the future? Do you think AI could take over your job, or do you
take over my job?
Or like, how do you think AI will affect urban planning?
Kara, is a very, very good question. It's a question that also worries me. I think there's opportunity, but there are also some dangers with the use of AI. I come from currently in my new role, I'm in the Singapore University of Technology and Design, and we really, really look at AI, okay? So, and lots of technology. I think you cannot avoid the advancement of technology, But my caution is that unfortunately technology is advancing faster than the human side to keep up in terms of things like code of ethics, understand what technology can do or should not do, are there guardrails? I think that technology is just going so fast and we haven't caught up with a lot of these considerations. You want to harness the best of technology, but you also need some guardrails, right? I mean, look at the internet. When it came out, everybody, wow, it's great, right? Now it's, wow, it's not so great because of all the problems on site. In fact, in our research, we already looked at online harms many years ago before it became such a big issue, right? The warning signs are there. So you need to put in guardrails. Now, will AI take over our job? Well, that is an open question. We do a lot of research on how AI can help you in your job. I happen to have a team of people studying the relationship between the AI and the human being, right? And we believe, at least my group of researchers, that there is a role for both. We don't think it's one or the other. We think that the AI is a partner in this journey in finding solutions. It's not one or the other replacing. Why? Let me just give you an example. We started this program of research that looks at how technology is going to impact our life, both society and the economy. And we found that when we did ethnographic studies, we break down, we don't call it a job, we break a job down into tasks, all right? We break it down into tasks. And when we analyze the task and talk to the worker who's performing the task, we realize that there are certain X factors that the machine cannot take over. And there are some things that the worker really enjoys. So why do you take it away from them? So we need to understand how to deploy technology to get the best, maybe mundane tasks that you don't need to do, but to keep the human being at his best at what he can do. So the two should be partners rather than one replacing the other. Unfortunately, I think people haven't quite understood this. So a lot of studies actually need to be done. So actually we work with companies and even unions to try to see how we can match the best of both, because the human being needs to be retrained to understand and use technology, but the technology needs to be designed not to take away the best of the human being. If companies just say, oh, tomorrow we'll just use AI and we just drop all the jobs, maybe they haven't analyzed the job enough to understand what that job entails, and whether by removing completely the human being, you have lost something, right? Or whether you should be restructuring your job to enable both to perform at its best. I mean, I say it like that, but actually there's been a lot of studies being done and a lot of data being collected. But I think there's a lot to be studied. We are right at the tip of it. But whatever it is, it's good to understand technology and AI. I don't think you can do without it, especially for your generation. Yeah? But I do say something which, as a parent, I would say, don't believe everything. All right? I do get worried when you write an essay and you don't know, you just type into ChatGPT, maybe now DeepSeek comes up with something and you believe everything it says. I mean, I tested it, right? I'm an urban planner. I asked it questions on urban planning, come up with a beautiful essay, but I know that it's not completely correct. Why? Because I have the domain knowledge. So when you study in school, you need to develop the domain knowledge, right? The AI and the technology can help you, but to be discerning, you need to have the domain knowledge. Now, a lot of your parents are here. Don't know whether you're my generation. Some of you are a lot younger than me. But in the old days, when we were in school, our teachers used to make us derive formulas. Do you still do that? Why? Why did the teacher make us derive a formula from the beginning? Because if you don't derive the formula, you don't understand how you got that formula and the relationship between all the different elements and variables in that formula. You don't understand the theory behind it. That's why you derive a formula. But then came along even simple calculators that took away the formula, they inserted into the calculator, you type in, the answer comes out, but you don't know why it comes out. So if there's something wrong, you also don't know. So I mean, I draw it as a parallel, right? AI is probably a lot more complicated, but I think you do need to gain domain knowledge in order to assess whether what you're getting from AI is actually correct. Okay?
We have time for just 2 more questions, and we have to prioritise students.
Sorry
I'm
for
afraid.
the long answers.
No, that's fine. I've got these 2 students here who've been patiently waiting.
Hi, Julia, grade 11.
Oh, yeah. Okay, hi.
Julia, grade 11. I was wondering, you mentioned New York and congestion pricing. Do you think measures like ERP can be applied to most cities in the world, and why or why not?
It's not a technology question, right? Because the technology is there for you to do it. It's often a political question. So I can't answer for the politicians. It takes a lot of political will to do this. The technology is there. There's so much technology that helps you to actually do the congestion pricing. But it takes a very strong politician to push the idea through. I think that's the challenge. Okay. As a planner, I think you should have congestion pricing. Yes.
Hello, so my name is Ayan, and I'm a grade 11 student. So thank you so much for your insightful presentation, first of all. So I just have a few questions. So firstly, like, how do government kind of city planning policies affect urban sustainability? And what can other countries learn from Singapore? And kind of what Singapore can improve upon its already pretty much, I say, perfect policies. But so in addition, like, what are like the benefits of kind of like UWC Dover's moving to Tenga, and what are the future land use plans for Dover campus? Because we're the since affected as
I start with the last one. The last one, you should direct the question to your principal. I think they're just developing the plan, but he seems to have thought through very thoroughly. He told me the brief is this thick, so he's thought about many, many things on behalf of the students. Now, your questions are very broad, so I would just touch on very briefly. Sustainability is very important because it's important that at the national level, you have an aspiration to be sustainable, and we have set our climate goals for Singapore. Actually, it's very, very hard for Singapore to achieve net zero. It's very, very hard, and yet we committed, okay? So I always say best effort, we'll do whatever we can, do a little bit. Actually, whether Singapore is net zero or net positive doesn't contribute very much to the world because we're very tiny. But I think we want to be a very responsible global citizen. We play our part. Maybe some of the solutions could be used by other people, right? So we try. So once you set your sustainability goals, it cascades through all the strategies that you see there, all right? Why do you want to be car light? Because you want to reduce carbon emissions, right, from cars. So that's just one example. So it just percolates entirely through the system. So it's not lip service. I tell you, we calculate all the carbon that we are going to emit and find ways to eliminate it, okay? There's still a lot to improve on. I don't think we're there yet. And there are always new challenges, yeah? Okay.
Right, thank you, Professor. Thank you. Great questions.
For any of us residents of Singapore, whether citizen, PR, or visitor, it's very easy to take for granted how easy a city seems to be to live in. But listening to Prof is a stark reminder of just how much care goes into things, that nothing happens by accident, that actually the fruits that we're enjoying today maybe started 30 or 40 years ago, and that if we pay close attention to the urban landscape, there are things we'll see that we may not have seen before. But perhaps more than that, the big takeaway for us is that wonderful things only happen if wonderful people are prepared to commit to them and to pay it forward to the future, to think about their careers as a contribution to public good and to our children and their children ahead of us. And I think that's a wonderful reminder of the possibility that careers can be infused with value, that they can have a bigger purpose than themselves, and that purpose can give far more meaning than just building a road. You're building something for the future. So Prof spoke about her children and grandchildren, and as a school that looks to peace and sustainability, certainly we share that aspiration for our students. So in my introductory remarks, I mentioned that the theme of these lectures was inform, innovate, and inspire. And I think Prof and the students have more than delivered on all three. If I can add a fourth I hope we all leave invigorated to appreciate the island and things around us all the more. So thank you, Prof. Thank you for the students for your wonderful time tonight. Good night, everybody. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Have a great evening. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks, guys. All the best.